If there is to be reconciliation, first there must be truth. Good evening and welcome. This is Face the Nation. Our topic of discussion today, United Nations Human Rights Council, where is Sri Lanka headed, disaster or consensus? Joining us this evening on the show are Nishan Sydney Premithuratna, attorney at law, affiliated to the Ministry of Justice. Also joining us tonight on the show are Dr. Manik Wakkumura, Department of International Relations, University of Colombo, Ambika Satkaranathan, Human Rights Advocate and former Commissioner of the Human Rights Commission of Sri Lanka, Dr. Jehan Pereira, Executive Director, National Peace Council of Sri Lanka. Let's start off tonight's show with Ambika Satkaranathan, Human Rights Advocate and also former Commissioner of the Human Rights Commission of Sri Lanka. Ambika, interestingly today, Michelle Bachelet, the Human Rights Commissioner, made a startling revelation on Sri Lanka today at the Human Rights Council sessions. What does this mean as far as Sri Lanka is concerned?
Well, firstly, I don't think, it was a startling revelation as such, because if you look at a previous report that she presented, a lot of the issues that she raised in that report continued to be here, like, for instance, in relation to militarization, police violence, judicial proceedings in emblematic human rights cases, pardons, presidential pardons, police deaths in police custody, etc. So these are not new as such. But what happens is, so now because of Resolution 46/1, she has to give an oral report now, and then in March she has to give a written report. So the purpose of this is for the Office of the High Commissioner to monitor Sri Lanka and to present to the Council developments since the resolution was passed, to see whether Sri Lanka has actually addressed any of the issues raised last time, has implemented any of the recommendations she made, etc. So in that sense, that is what happened. So tomorrow then the member states will make statements, NGOs will make statements. So it's basically a process of recording at this particular moment, since the resolution was passed, what have been the developments.
Ambika, do you think that the government has gone on a rampage to shoot itself on the foot or the feet in terms of addressing the most dire human rights issues in Sri Lanka at present? Like, as you mentioned, the presidential pardon was discussed, intimidation against journalists, emergency regulations, police brutality, Office of the Missing Persons. All these issues were discussed in today's statement that was issued by the Human Rights Commissioner. Do you think the government has shot itself in the foot by going on a rampage against all these matters?
Well, let me put it this way. They have not taken action, the government has not taken action to address any of the issues that were raised. So in that sense, we saw if it was militarization, it just became worse with COVID, because the COVID response was also militarized. And police brutality, for instance, we have not seen a reduction of that. If at all, we have seen increased or excessive use of force in many contexts. We have seen deaths in police custody. We have seen, encounters and deaths of persons who have been arrested for drug offenses, etc. And in terms of dealing with the past, there's been no progress on many of these emblematic cases. The Office of the Missing Persons, well, there hasn't been any progress there either. We have seen that families of the disappeared in the north have been subject to surveillance, harassment, pressure not to continue their advocacy, etc. So in a sense, the government has taken no action, and we have seen the human rights situation deteriorate since the resolution was passed in March.
Must we or should we take the Human Rights Council in Geneva seriously?
Well, the point is, Sri Lanka is a member of the United Nations, and we are a member of the Community of Nations, which means we are bound by customary international law, in addition to which we have ratified many UN treaties. So all these things that the High Commissioner is talking about is not new. She didn't pick them out of the air. All these rights are enshrined in some international covenant that Sri Lanka has signed, which means we do have a duty. But more than that, the purpose of the council is if a government does not, let's say, protect and promote human rights of its citizens, then it is supposed
But Hamika, the problem is we've been discussing about the Human Rights Council in Geneva, the action taken by the council. It started in 2009 when the then UN General Secretary Ban Ki-moon arrived in Sri Lanka, had a meeting with President Mahinda Rajapaksa. Right after the end of the war in Sri Lanka, we saw the manner in which how a joint statement was issued by both parties. 12 years since then, nothing concrete has taken place by either party.
Exactly. And
So
therein
must we
lies the
take it
problem.
seriously?
Well, the point is this. Must we take it seriously? Well, clearly it's important for the victim. So if you go and speak to families that disappeared, then you will find, yes, to them it's important because they still, and about 60 parents in just the last year, 60 parents have died. People who have been looking for their children, they've passed away, and when they died, they did not know the
But
truth.
scars left behind by the conflict needs time to heal, and that has to only heal through a domestic process. And that domestic process has been initiated by the Sri Lankan government since 2009.
Exactly, and now it is 11 years. We've had multiple commissions, not just this government, even previously, because the violations are prior to even 2009. And despite the multiple, the LLRC, the Udalagama Commission, the Paranagama Commission, I could go on and on, the Multiple Disappearances Commission, all of them have made recommendations. Tell me which one of those recommendations were implemented. So therein lies the problem, the fact the government is taking no action.
You were a former commissioner of the Human Rights Commission of Sri Lanka. If I asked you, what did you all do when you all were elected to power? Because in 2015, the Good Governance government came into power with the intention, with the promise to find a resolution to all these problems. And you all are responsible also for this mess that we are in right now.
Well, actually, this was not within our mandate. The government passed laws and set up institutions like the Reparations Commission. They didn't establish an accountability mechanism. They didn't establish a Truth Commission. So where the Human Rights Commission was concerned, what did we do? I think we said that torture is systemic. We investigated many incidents of custodial violence. We did a massive prison study, the first ever in this country, 863-page report. And that actually sets out all the problems in the...
But such reports have been swept under the carpet, and nothing substantial has ever taken place out of those reports.
Well, if they've been swept under the carpet, Shamir, who sweeps them under the carpet? Once again, somehow in all these conversations, we keep coming back to the government. And you know why? Because at the end of the day, it is the government that has a duty. It is the government that has the responsibility to take action. And when it doesn't, people are forced to seek other means. And those means don't always work because ultimately, that's the core, the government.
Right. Thank you very much. That, of course, was Ambika Satgurunathan, human rights advocate, as well as one of the former commissioners of the Human Rights Commission of Sri Lanka. I now move my attention to Dr. Manik Wakamura, Department of International Relations, University of Colombo. Dr. Manik, do you think the international community, by all these efforts, are trying to strangulate the Sri Lankan government, put it on the mat? Is that what all this is all about?
Well, there are different ways to examine this. I think more importantly, what we have to understand is Sri Lanka represents the international system as a nation state. And as Ambika also mentioned, we do represent the United Nations. And we did have a lot of reputation in terms of, taking our intentions at the UN General Assembly at the Second World War when President J.R. Jayawardena spoke about, non-violence. So we had some sort of a reputation and a gain in the international system. But that doesn't necessarily mean that international system should function against a nation state just because that state is weakened in democracy. And the fact that we have to understand here is that we have gone through the 26 years long war, and that war has caused such immense of consequences. The harm that came to individuals, the communities are so much. And that fact is something seriously insisting to the international community to have an obligation over the government to, work on fast recoveries.
The problem is, Dr. Manik, why is that countries like Sri Lanka always in the spotlight? Let's take a look at the United States. We saw 3 years ago when the US withdrew from the UN Human Rights Council. They said the US has pulled out of the United Nations Human Rights Council, calling it a cesspool of political bias. The US envoy to the UN said it was a hypocritical body that makes a mockery of human rights. Why must we take these institutions seriously when the world body that you said, which is sponsoring the United Nations vastly, is saying something of this sort and withdrew from the United Nations Human Rights Council? And why are we taking these international organizations seriously?
Well, once again, what we have to basically understand is the obligation aspect. It doesn't matter whether a state is powerful or powerless. We do have a nation state, we do have an obligation to, work towards the development, work towards the recovery. And what we see for the last 12 years, that we failed to a great extent. And that failures have taken as repercussions at international fora to discuss about it and to make certain demands over, making certain actions.
So the government which has now been appointed with this rhetoric, the nationalistic rhetoric, Dr. Manik, has been elected to power, given a resounding victory at the presidential election as well as the general election. So at the look of it, you start wondering whether this is what the general public in Sri Lanka want, at least the majority. Why are we thinking about the intentions of a minority that still speaks about the scars left behind by the conflict? Isn't it time for us to move forward? We saw the manner in which how the Bosnian war unfolded. Still the matters have not been resolved. And no country is poking their finger at Yugoslavia or the Bosnian conflict and saying, this is what happened, this is what needs to be done, this is the way forward. In fact, the US has occupied very well in countries like Kosovo now, an ex-Yugoslavian state, and making sure that everything is going hunky-dory in those countries. Isn't this the time to put behind the wounds left behind by the conflict and not talk about it anymore? Isn't that what the majority of the people in Sri Lanka want?
Well, perhaps yes, but there is also certain things to be considered. Now, I would look at this in two ways. Now, we have a very strong international obligation in terms of human security, and that human security mandate has been expanded to the level where international community call action on an individual state. And that action is just not coming from multilateral fora. It can also come from non-state actors. Because when normatively speaking, we know the fact that the critical theory of international security promotes the idea that state is not the only referent object of human security. There can be incidents that state can be the culprit. The state can be the violator of human rights, the violator of human security of its own population. If you look at UN itself, there are quite a number of resolutions, projects that have taken place since the Cold War, making international community to work towards in a consensus manner to look at individual states.
Tell me one country, Dr. Manik, that the United Nations Human Rights Council has been successful in, just one country. Let's take an example of that country and then let's talk about and let's move this discussion forward. Tell me one country in the world that has gone through a conflict and the UNHRC has intervened and there has been success, a success story, tell me.
Well,
None.
yes, of course.
Nowhere in the world.
Well, Human Rights Council, it's of course it's a subsidiary body. It's subsidiary body to the UN General Assembly, and it has the power for reporting, monitoring, and evaluation only. So what we have to take here is the fact that there are these repercussions about weakening democracy, not addressing the urgent issues of humanitarian crises, human security issues that are quite severe at domestic level. And unless the state take a strong stand and continuously work towards a plan, of course we will definitely get into this trouble of interfering of policies that comes through international community to maneuver over the domestic policy. Nevertheless, the fact, of course, the United Nations do have this approach for localized approaches. If you look at the Brahimi report that came in 2004, after a decade of human security development report that's expanded the human security concerns to consider how an individual is enjoying the freedom from fear, freedom from want, freedom from indignity, and at the same time mandating individual state to take action.
Right.
And for the reason that individual state at some point fails to do so, the international community takes an action, and that is something that we cannot deny of.
Thank you very much, Dr. Manik Wakumara, Department of International Relations, University of Colombo. I now move my attention to Dr. Jehan Pereira, Executive Director of the National Peace Council of Sri Lanka. Dr. Jehan, we saw the end of the conflict in 2009. We do not want to visit that again. However, in 2019, we saw another terror attack that took place in Sri Lanka. That was the Easter Sunday bombings. The people decided that trauma, that fear that sends shivers down the spine of all Sri Lankans should not be repeated again. Having said that, Dr. Jehan Pereira, do you think the government is doing enough in terms of achieving its obligations? Because we saw the manner in which how Dinesh Gunawardena, when they were appointed, when he was appointed as a Minister of Foreign Affairs, very eloquently articulated that they want to withdraw from the co-sponsoring of the resolution. That was something that was carried out by the previous government. However, 46(1) came in as a surprise to the government, and that further strangulated the government. Do you think this happened as a result of the government's haphazard decision to withdraw from co-sponsoring the resolution and trying to reign supreme in the eyes of the general public who elected them to power?
Yeah, you started by talking about what happened on Easter Sunday. Yeah, and that very unexpected bombing, which came from out of the blue, as it were, led people to want strengthen national security, and the then opposition campaigned on that platform and got a very big majority. And the priorities of that government were national security and also national sovereignty. And where national sovereignty was concerned, the government took the position that the co-sponsored resolution of the previous government had eroded our national sovereignty. So it was on that reasoning that they withdrew. And I suppose their belief was that by withdrawing from that resolution, they would be able to not fulfill the promises given by that government, which they felt was extracted by the international community under pressure, under duress, and that Sri Lanka gave in under duress. And so what the government said in 2020 March, when they withdrew from the co-sponsored resolution, was that they would come up with their own local, indigenous reconciliation model, and that they would not need to follow the internationally prescribed reconciliation model. The problem is that since that time, there has been no reconciliation really taking place in the country.
So let's talk about what has happened globally, Dr. Jehan. Before moving on to the Sri Lankan context, let's take a look at the US for an example. They did not comply with UN resolutions 16 times when they started attacking Afghanistan. 16 times. They still went ahead and did it. So where is the power of such a UN board? Now, don't forget, US is a part of the UN Security Council as well. And they went ahead and started not listening or complying to the UN Security Council resolution itself. So where does a body like the UN Human Rights Council stand in this equation? Absolutely powerless, isn't it?
Well, it would be, I mean, the US is a superpower, and we are not a superpower. And in a way, we
just because you're a superpower, you are allowed to abscond all these problems and reign supreme. That's not a fair argument.
I know it's not.
Why are we under the hammer?
It's not a fair argument, and it's the same argument that applies even within a country. You know, the people who have more money and are richer tend to be able to defend themselves better in the courts of law than those who are poor. So it's the same thing in the international system also.
But Dr. Jehan, these are very countries in 2018 said that it's a hypocritical body, and then in 2021, when the Biden administration came to power, they said we recognize that the Human Rights Council is a flawed body in need of reform to its agenda, membership and focus, including its disappropriation focus on many countries. So this is not fair. Why are we always under the hammer? Because time comes to the NGOs or the international non-governmental organizations to play a role, or even the Tamil communities, Tamil parties in Sri Lanka, they start talking about the minority rights only when the United Nations Human Rights Council sessions are closer. Let's take a look at R. Sambandhan's ITAC. Let's look at C.V. Vignesan's party. All these parties talk about human rights violations only close to a UNHRC session and nothing else.
I know the reason that they do that is because they have failed to vindicate their rights or get their human rights protected within the country. Then they look elsewhere, outside. And although the UN Human Rights Council may be a flawed body, nevertheless...
This is not what I'm saying, Dr. Jehan. This is what the US is saying.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so even, and it is a flawed body in a way. It's a political body because in the end it is, there are two aspects to the UN Human Rights Council. One is the Secretariat, which is the bureaucracy, which I think has a greater commitment to human rights in its ideal form. And then there is the Human Rights Council, the body that votes, and they vote often on political grounds. So if the US doesn't like a country, US probably can mobilize the support of other countries. So that's a political body. But the reason why it is important to Sri Lanka, even though it is a flawed body, the reason why it is important to Sri Lanka to pass muster with the UN Human Rights Council is that we also depend on a good human rights track record to get something else that is very important to us, which is the European Union's GSP plus tariff privilege. And that is determined solely on human rights grounds. The EU gives it as a reward to countries that follow human rights, 27 conventions. So Sri Lanka, if we want that reward, that very important reward for us of lower taxes when our goods are exported to the EU, which is good for our businesses, good for our exporters, good for our labor, then we have to, in a way, get the approval of the UN Human Rights Council.
But how fair is it, Dr. Jehan Pereira, how fair is it when respective governments are the individuals who are responsible for protecting human rights in a respective country's concern, And why are the people penalized for it? Even the GSP Plus concession, when the previous government was in power, the Mahinda Rajapaksa administration, the GSP Plus was withdrawn. When the Yahapalani government came into power, because they co-sponsored the UN resolution, the GSP Plus was given again. And now the discussions are going about again about whether or not the GSP Plus concession will be given to Sri Lanka in the next few years as well. This is political, nothing else, is it? Isn't this all political? Just because they don't like someone's face, they are going to penalize that person because we don't like that person's face. Is that fair?
Well, I think the UN, the EU's policy is that if countries are following human rights, if governments are following human rights, then they will give. I mean, it's a gift. So it's their right to determine the terms under which they give us this gift. And their gift is given if our government follows human rights. I'm not saying that they are actually going to withdraw it this time. That may not be the case. They did withdraw it once. For 6 years we lost it, and it cost our economy a lot. It cost our labor a lot. Our businesses also suffered a lot. So we have learned the lesson, and I think because this government, it was under this government, its earlier incarnation, that we lost GSP Plus, because they learned the lesson. This time I think they want to keep it.
Right.
And therefore, I think our government, I mean, when they came to power, they must have been full of optimism and maybe hubris also, because they had got such a huge majority. They had won and come to power. At that point, they withdrew.
Yeah.
But then, unexpectedly, the COVID came and destroyed any hope of economic progress. And I think also they probably found that the international community, the Western international community, is also very strong.
Right. Thank you
Even
very
though
much.
China is strong, so is the Western international community.
Thank you very much.
And therefore, we need their goodwill in order to develop our economy.
Right. Thank you very much, Dr. Jahan Pereira. I now move my attention to Nishan Sidney Premathiratna, attorney at law, affiliated to the Ministry of Justice. Nishan, interestingly, if you listened, or were you able to listen to the speech made by the opening remarks of the Human Rights Commissioner today?
Yes, Shamir, I actually got a printout out of that.
Right. So I'll just summarize what she said. She speaks about the presidential pardons. She speaks about emergency regulations. She speaks about police brutality, the Office of the Missing Persons, the Attorney General's Department dropping charges against the former Navy commander, then also intimidation against journalists, and also the holding up of 2 prisoners under the Prevention of Terrorism Act. Nishan, this government's reputation over the years, the Rajapaksa administration, has not been clean at all. It has always been riddled with problems when it comes to human rights. Let's take a look at 2009. President Mahinda Rajapaksa's declaration on the joint statement with UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon, we will make progress with regard to the Lessons Learned and Reconciliation Commission report. What happened? Absolutely nothing. The LLRC report was published. It's on paper. However, one of the accused in the LLRC report was the former SLFP Vice President, Karuna Amman. What action was taken? Absolutely nothing. But when action had to be taken against individuals, they don't do so. This affects the sentiments of a minority in Sri Lanka. We can't forget that there is a minority in this island nation who probably did not vote for Mahinda Rajapaksa, who probably did not vote for President Gotabaya Rajapaksa, who are living citizens of this nation. Their ideas, their ideologies have to be respected, isn't it?
Shamir, I think the other questions would have been easier for me to handle, but your question is good. So let me start, let's put everything into context. Now, the initial co-sponsored resolution in 2015 was withdrawn by the present government. Now, right now, I am here not in any capacity of being a representative of the government, but expressing my own free opinion. Now, there was a reason which I believe, which the more elite and knowledgeable people in the in respect of international relations can possibly appraise all of us, as to why. Now, I had a concern with the co-sponsored resolution. Now, you put it very correctly that the US also does not abide by the Human Rights Council decisions. Now, this is a resolution in 2015 which was tabled by the US itself, and we co-sponsored it. Now, there was a cardinal issue which I felt in that resolution, which is in respect of item number 6. Now, item number 6 in the resolution says, which was co-sponsored, welcomes the recognition by government of Sri Lanka, the accountability is essentials to uphold rule of law, and it goes on, and it says, and also affirms in this regard the importance of participation in a Sri Lankan judicial mechanism, including the Special Counsel, Office of Commonwealth and other foreign judges, defense lawyers and authorized prosecutors and investigators. Now, Shamir, I was here, I think, about 5 months ago, and we were debating on the port city and the legality of it. And I think the question was posed to me that in this whole saga in the Supreme Court, one of the remarks made by a party or a lawyer representing one of the supporting petitioners was that there is no requirement of judges in the Supreme Court being Sri Lankan, right? But there was a lot of debate on that. Now, accountability and reconciliation, it is my position, has to be within the purview of our constitution.
No, but Nishan, let's not talk about that co-sponsoring of that resolution because we are out of it now.
Yes, I agree.
Very clearly says that we are not going to be a part of this particular resolution in question, and henceforth 46(1) came into play.
Yes.
Now, however, the problem is 46(1) of the UNHRC resolution has also not been concretely executed by the present government in power. Now, that is the problem
let's put things into
the Human Rights
context.
Commissioner is talking about.
Yeah. Let's put things into context, Shamir. Now, the 48th session is in progress at the moment. Now, we have till March 2022 where a written update will be given in respect of our progress. Now, what happened today is merely an oral update. Now, thereafter, at the 51st session of this Human Rights Council in September 2022, a comprehensive report will be tabled in respect of Sri Lanka's progression. Now, you correctly pointed out, which it's my personal opinion, that this seemingly is a political organization, this UN Human Rights Council. It is seemingly directing its agenda, or the members in the council are directing its agenda if they don't like the face of the state.
Yeah, let's forget that for a moment, Nishan. Let's talk about the sentiments of the people of Sri Lanka, the minority community. Now, they probably did not vote in favor of President Mahinda Rajapaksa at the general election, or did not vote in favor of President Gotabaya Rajapaksa at the presidential election. But at the end of the day, they are living citizens of this nation as well, and their grievances have to be addressed by the respective government in power.
Definitely.
And so what has the government done? Absolutely nothing.
100%.
Now, let's take a look at the issue with regard to the missing persons in the eastern province, where the Attorney General's Department dropped charges against the former Navy commander. Isn't this putting a full stop on investigations that need to be carried out?
So, Shamir,
isn't this the responsibility of the Attorney General's Department to make sure those who are responsible are brought before the law, before book?
Definitely. That is a mandatory requirement even within the purview of our law. It's not something which we need to wait and address in anticipation of getting the UN Human Rights Council to adhere to what we want.
But if the government is not doing it, at least an international body has to do it, no?
No, international body can't do it. I don't believe the international body can do it on Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka has to do it for its own citizens.
But they are not doing so.
No, so we have to...
Just look at the statement that was made by Cardinal Malcolm Ranjit recently. He is saying that if the government is failing to do a proper investigation into the Easter Sunday bombings, he is requesting for an international investigation. Now, this is an individual who has been pressing the government since 2019 to bring those responsible before book.
Definitely, and
and nothing has been done.
That is the mandate which the people also gave this government, is to inquire into the Easter Sunday attacks. Now, the other you are coming to a pertinent point, Shamir. Now in that context, the question of the PTA. Now this lady...
Now, 2 people have been arrested under the PTA.
That is correct. That is correct.
And that is one of your colleagues, probably one of your colleagues as well.
I'm not here advocating that the detention orders which can be extended for a period of 2 years is correct. I'm not saying that. The PTA has its flaws. Now the government, I'm not here voicing the opinion of the government, but the government at least has taken a step by appointing a committee to look into this PTA.
But the problem is, Nishan, even when you look at the statement that was issued by the Human Rights Commission, she's saying, give us a moratorium as to how you're going to repeal the PTA in Sri Lanka. Don't arbitrarily detain individuals. Now, this is a big question mark.
Definitely.
Tomorrow you will be arrested under the PTA, Nishan.
Now the thing is, Shamir, though the PTA, this is my personal opinion,
right.
Though the PTA is seemingly considered as a piece of legislature which takes away or limits rights of citizens, in a situation of terrorism, this is my personal opinion, terrorists or terrorist masterminds are not people who will do an offense which is very apparent. They have to be interrogated.
So you're saying that interrogation process has to happen for over 200 days.
No, I didn't say that. I am saying
is that
Sri Lanka as a country has to, they are re-looking at this. This PTA was not brought about by the Rajapaksa regime or even before by the Yahapalana regime. It was bought, it is a whole piece of legislature. It was there, it was brought in for a purpose. Now,
but this was arbitrarily executed by the present regime in power, by the Rajapaksa government.
Now I can put the question back to you,
This
Shamir.
probably would have been there before. There is no question about that. All the laws in Sri Lanka are quite archaic and are very old. But the fact of the matter is, such an act has been implemented to its whim and fancy only by the Rajapaksa regimes in power.
No, I don't. The thing is, I don't want to talk on specific instances. But if I give you an overall gist of what this lady has spoken today, she has spoken on matters which the Sri Lankan government has to address. And why they need to address? Not because the resolution can be arbitrarily implemented against Sri Lanka when it is passed at the Human Rights Council and possibly if it is ratified at the Security Council. I don't believe that we should be addressing our country in respect of addressing the UN resolution. No, we need to have a proper reconciliation process. We need to do that.
But that's what happened on Nishan.
Yes,
even with withdrawing from the co-sponsored resolution was an election promise. Giving a presidential pardon to
my question, Shamir, how can you agree?
The sentence an army officer was a presidential pardon, but that was taken by the highest court in Sri Lanka, the Commercial High Court of Colombo. I can mention the name of the army officer as well, Sunil. So it was done how? Just to make sure that the people, the masses, they gain the popularity of the masses. Is that fair? Just to gain the popularity of the masses, let's forget about the general sentiment of the minority community of Sri Lanka. Is that fair, Nishan? Just tell me, is that fair?
Governance has to be done. There is a sovereignty of the people which is being entrusted in respect of the executive and the legislature. So if the leaders who are in power are acting arbitrarily or acting in violation of certain laws, there are provisions which can hold them accountable. Now, pardoning is not something which I personally believe should be in our constitution. I believe pardoning has to be taken out. That is my personal opinion. It is not only the present president who has pardoned people, the previous president also has pardoned people. And presidents before that also has pardoned people. So we should look at that. We should repeal that completely. Why do we want to have that provision in the constitution?
Now, you being a member of the Ministry of Justice, Nishan, you have a better say in when the new constitution is being made to press the government to repeal that part of the constitution as well.
Definitely, because ultimately you and I and everyone here should be able to hold anybody accountable. We don't want to go into a criminal suit and where one person is sent to the gallows and the next day there is power given to the executive to pardon that person. Right. That is bad.
So we'll get back to all this and more momentarily. I want to open the floor for questions from our journalists. On to my immediate left is a law student and producer at Newsfirst, Charlene Benedict. On to my far left is manager English News, Azra San. So let's start off today's Q&A with the lady. Charlene, are you okay? Yes, okay. So let's start off with Azra.
Thank you, Shamir. I'll pose my first question to Mr. Premudiratna. Nishan, we saw the newly appointed Minister of Foreign Affairs handing over a 13-page note to Hannah Singer recently, stating as to how we have fulfilled certain responsibilities when it comes to human rights. And then it was followed with a media briefing where he made a special statement about the steps that were taken. So if the current government is so confident about the fact that they have upheld human rights in the country, why make an extra effort to convince these international dignitaries about the steps that they have taken?
Well, it is not my position here, Azra, that the government has done a sterling job. I am not here to come and say that. It is not my position to say that. Government is making an endeavor to consider this resolution as a serious matter, and they are trying to address the concerns raised by the resolution which was tabled in March 2021, and possibly it will make an endeavor to address the oral summary which was today placed by the Human Rights High Commission. Now, the question is, I think Shamir raised an important point. Now, if we look at this resolution vote which was effected when it was taken in March 2021, we have 14 countries which abstained from voting. We thought they were friendly to Sri Lanka. Countries like India, countries like Japan, and even Iran, they abstained from voting. Now, is there any logical reason why India, being our neighbor nation, who came to Sri Lanka in 1997 when our World Cup, Australia and West Indies was sabotaging our World Cup, not willing to come to our country, they came amidst the threat of terrorism and played a game of cricket to show goodwill.
No, Nishan, that's
no,
not a fair comparison to make. No, that's not a fair comparison to make. Just because India came to Sri Lanka to play a cricket match, that doesn't necessarily mean that India was in favor of the human rights record of Sri Lanka at that time. That's not a fair comparison to make.
No, I'm not. Now, India has not come out in the open and said
1988, when there was a problem in Sri Lanka.
1997.
No,
1995.
1995. This was the World Cup now, but let's talk about when Sri Lanka was not allowing food containers to go to the Jaffna Peninsula. India came and dropped dry rations.
Definitely.
in the northern peninsula because of the issues that the government had with the Indian regime and the Tamil people at that time. They had to do that. They had to intervene, and then Sri Lankan government did not have anything to say about it as well.
So
ultimately, let's not talk about. Let's not draw comparison between these
to
two.
your
That's
point.
the wrong.
No, Shamir, I concede. What I'm trying to tell you is these are all circumstantial. Now, what the India's mindset on Sri Lanka, as it stood in March 2021, might not be the same mindset in 2023 September when Sri Lanka's progression is being considered and voted upon again. Now there is a country such as Iran. Now for what reason did Iran possibly abstain from voting against Sri Lanka?
You want to know the reason, Nishan?
I know.
Yeah,
I know.
I can tell you the reason if
you
want.
can tell me, I also can tell you. So, but now has the status quo changed? Has the status quo in March 2020?
Majority of the Muslim nations
That
did
is
not
the thing.
vote in favor of the Sri Lankan government at
Definitely.
the last resolution.
Definitely.
Why? Because of the
Cremation
2019.
issue.
No, it's because of the 2019 Easter bomb attacks.
That is also true. Definitely. But
That's the reason. That is the reason.
Yes.
Nothing else.
So these are all now. If that, my simple point, Shamir, is that all of these things are circumstantial. We can work towards convincing these nations to form or to support us in 1.5 years' time. This is 47 countries only who are going to decide Sri Lanka's fate. But that being said, Azra, I am not here to come and tell the nation that this UN resolution should be just looked at as a political or as a milestone merely to get over. We should actually look at reconciliation. We should actually look at a homegrown reconciliation process.
But
And
it's apparently happening, Nishan, because when Hannah Singer and these international dignitaries suggested that they have an external mechanism to ensure that these human rights are upheld in the country, the government said, no, we don't need that because all these domestic processes are taking place without a problem. So it is happening. What is the problem?
So, Azra, I think before you came, with all due respect to you, that was the reason I highlighted as to why I, as a lawyer, felt that the co-sponsored resolution had an issue. Because we had, I read that section, item 6, which specifically referred to foreign judges coming into Sri Lanka and giving them the power to decide on our matters, which I felt, which I, as an attorney at law, has taken an oath to uphold the constitution. And the sovereignty of the people is vested in our judiciary. So, now, as Shamir says, that is now done and dusted.
No, but even Nishan, now
Yes.
you said about India
Yeah.
quite some time ago. Don't forget, 10 years ago also India voted against Sri Lanka. In 2012, Sri Lanka voted against the UN resolution against Sri Lanka. In 2013, they did the same thing again against Sri Lanka. So this is not far away. We are not talking about 1997 cricket match. We are talking about 2012, 2013 and 2021. So there is a clear problem with our neighboring nation as well. So the government has failed to even win the hearts and minds of the Tamil populace in the Jaffna Peninsula and has failed to even win the hearts and minds of the Indian government in power as well.
Conceding with you to an extent, now we look at I'll be the devil's advocate in this whole saga, right? Now, what can happen? What is the worst which can happen to Sri Lanka? Now here this is purely discussing the resolution, not about reconciliation. Now say the same High Commissioner tables in 1.5 years' time that Sri Lanka has done nothing, absolutely nothing. We have mucked up the PTA, we have arrested so many people, we have done the police has acted arbitrarily, all of that, and that a further resolution needs to be tabled in respect of Sri Lanka. And then that has to be then taken, I think the more elite personnel in respect to the subject matter can correct me, will have to be ratified, if at all, by the Security Council. Now we at least on paper have a member here who has voted in our favor, who is also a superpower.
There are two members.
Two members, that is the thing. So you correct
Russia and China both.
That is the thing. So if we can talk till the cows come home on this matter, but ultimately, as you started very correctly, Shamir, with all due respect to you, this is I don't want to use the word functus body.
My job, Nishan, while commending my work, I must tell you that my job is to make sure that I show the people two
The
sides
correct
of the coin.
position.
Now, I can't ask a soft question from you and ask another soft question from Dr. Jehan or Ambika or Dr. Manik. My role as the moderator of this show is to make sure that I show both sides of the coin to the public.
Definitely.
Getting back into what you said before, Ambika, let's take a look at Russia and China's role here. Is the government so sure that in the event the resolution is passed at the UNHRC and it goes to the UN Security Council or the UN General Assembly, the government has the veto of two strong member states at the UN Security Council, and henceforth they don't have to worry about the other nitty-gritties? Is that the attitude of the government? Is that what the government is thinking?
Are you referring here to being referred to the International Criminal Court or
International
the
Criminal Court.
establishment of a special court for which you need?
No, the International Criminal Court and the proceedings that would take thereafter. It has to go to the UN Security Council and henceforth it has to come into power. We know in 2015, one of the major issues that was portrayed at the election campaigns were taking the former statesman to the International Criminal Court. It was in Sinhala, it was Vidulu Pudota Rangana, taking the person to the gallows.
Electric chair, but
electric
the
chair.
international ICC, the Rome Statute, does not have the death penalty, so there's that. But anyway, go on.
Yeah, but do you think because the government knows they have the power or the backing of two powerful states in the UN Security Council, they don't want to really take much heed to the international community at the moment at the UNHRC? which is only a political body as stated by the US and other parties?
Well, the thing is, firstly, the entire UN is a political body, but all countries are part of it. And there are parts of the UN, I think, as Dr. Manik said, that, or I think Jihad said, that are not political, in that they are institutions. They are the UN agencies. The political bodies are the Council, the Assembly, the Security Council, etc. So in that, yes, the answer to your question is yes. If you take it to the Security Council to get them to refer it to the ICC, because Sri Lanka is not a party to the Rome Statute, then clearly you, as even with Sudan, right? I think it was 15, 16 times I think they took South Sudan there, and it was vetoed every time. So you're very correct in that that is probably why the government feels emboldened that they can't be held accountable. But there are other ways of holding people accountable. There's something called universal jurisdiction. A man, this is a case that happened recently, so I mentioned it before also. In 1988, he killed, tortured and killed political prisoners in Iran. So they got news in 2019 that he was coming to Sweden. What did they do? They got all the information, they got the evidence, they arrested him when he landed in Sweden, and now in 2021, August, the trial against this person has begun for alleged torture and murders that he did in 1988. So universal jurisdiction is increasingly being used. Even this year, there were other convictions as well. So that is one other mechanism of holding individuals accountable.
And Ambiga, in Michelle Bachelet's previous report to the Human Rights Commission as well, in a special statement, she had recommended that perpetrators of serious crime,
use all means, including universal jurisdiction, is one of the things that was mentioned.
In perpetrators or suspected perpetrators of human rights in Sri Lanka also be prosecuted under universal jurisdiction of other countries. Moving a little bit to Dr. Manik, now we were speaking about how this entire situation looks to the world, to Sri Lanka on the larger perspective, as to if reconciliation has taken place, as to if the government is implementing the recommendations or taking the steps to promote reconciliation. But we do know that there is something happening on the ground level as well. You've extensively studied reconciliation here in Sri Lanka. Is the situation in the national level or the larger picture a true reflection of what is happening on the ground?
Good question. I think let's try to digest some causes of the conflict. And we clearly see that there were communities from northern and the eastern province were trapped in the war that has gone for 26 years. And time to time, we see, you know, in 1983, there were huge Tamil community who have gone on refugee status, and by now we have roughly around 8 million Sri Lankan diaspora live across the world that do have a keen concern about what's going on in the country. Their relatives, their family members, their neighborhood still lies here. You know, they look at the situation here very rigorously. That's something that we cannot forget. That's something the government cannot definitely ignore at any point. On the other hand, what I'm really worried or what I'm really concerned is the humanitarian aspect of the catastrophe. You know, there are people who have been multi-displaced, you know, starting from 1980s to 2009. People are multi-displaced, you know, they were traveling from one place to another, and they've like gone through almost half of their youth or the young age, passing the violence of the war. And then we have an obligation as a citizen of a country, you know, if you look at the governance, we have an obligation to look into these individual cases, look into these community cases. Not only that, if you look at the resettlement process, you know, which cost billions of money to the government. And we have to see the success of the resettlement. You know, one time Sri Lanka was the country that has the largest IDP camp The Manik Farm was the largest IDP camp in the whole world.
Dr. Manik,
that consists of 300,000 people.
It's been about 12 years since the war ended in 2009. Now, every time the Human Rights Council sessions come up and there is calls for an international mechanism, an international procedure, the Sri Lankan government's position always is that, no, we will have a domestic mechanism, a domestic procedure to resettle people, a domestic procedure to ensure justice and reconciliation. 12 years down the line, what's the progress? Do we really have a domestic mechanism?
Well, that's a question. That's a very big question. I think we all love to have a domestic mechanism because then we will have less troubles. But look at the realities. You know, country has lost so much. People, resources. We were out of the rule of law for such a long period, and the government changes, the policies changes. So there's no continuation of the reconciliation as such that comes from the national to the grassroots level. And we always have this dilemma of understanding what exactly we should be doing. Right? And we are in the stage of that we meet this peace building anxiety. We don't know exactly what to start and what outcomes that we expect in all these, pathways. So absolutely, it's no doubt that domestic mechanism is the ideal situation. But we lost so much of money, and it's quite natural that we ask the donor support for example, take a simple case of rehabilitation and resettlement.
Dr. Manik,
we go through donor support to a greater extent.
Because of the domestic processes have become dysfunctional and have not been implemented properly, that is why an international probe is now important. Is that what you're trying to say?
Well, it's a very difficult question, right? Of course, if someone looks from the nationalistic point of view, of course, we will try to embrace all our national interest and do not let our sovereignty to be defeated at any cost. But if you look at the reality here, that we've failed to achieve something concrete for the last 12 years, and that is painful. That is painful, not just by looking from a larger picture, but looking from the grassroots picture. How communities still go through certain issues in terms of, they'll still look for their missing persons. If you go to Kilinochchi, if you go to Mullaitivu, you see it's very little number of people that hold the certificate of absence. Absolutely, maybe it's nobody. It's 1, 2, just that very low number of figures.
Dr. Manik,
just the reason is that people do not want to get the certificate of absence because they want their family members to return. Or they need the government to assure that their loved ones are no longer. And they are ready to accept that certificate of absence or the so-called the death certificate, so they are ready to get the compensation.
Right.
But that doesn't happen.
So, Dr. Jehan, interestingly, now you heard the sentiments expressed by Nishan, Dr. Manik, as well as Ambika with regard to the importance of having a proper system in play. Do you think an international investigation or an international inquiry is a way forward for Sri Lanka? Because this has been rejected over and over again by respective governments. Even President Maithripala Sirisena's government at the initial stage said they would be okay with the proposals of the UNHRC resolution, but then they sidetracked or backtracked or took a complete U-turn afterwards. Is a domestic mechanism the way forward, or is it an international inquiry the way forward for Sri Lanka?
I think any sovereign state would not want to internationalize its problems. I see international pressure as being important to push us along, because sometimes the internal factors, especially a government that is elected by the ethnic majority, doesn't have that pressure on it, because it is fairly secure that it can stay in power with the support of the ethnic majority, especially when the problem affects the ethnic minority. So therefore, there is a need for some international pressure. But in terms of the international community getting involved too much, in the end, the problem has to be solved within the country. Whatever the internationals do, what can they do? They can't force our government. It's the government that has to decide. It has to be a Sri Lankan government.
The issue only affecting ethnic minorities, but recent statements by the Human Rights High Commissioner have expanded into broader issues that that people of all ethnic persuasions in Sri Lanka face, including police brutality, unlawful detention. They've previously, in her previous statement, she spoke about the police inspector who was detained, Shania Besekara, and then lawyers, human rights advocates. So these are issues that affect all citizens. So it's not really an issue between an ethnic majority and an ethnic minority right now, is it? It's broader than that now. Is that the case?
That is correct. I mean, this problem that we went into the UN system because of the ethnic conflict, but now because we have failed to deal with that, it has got expanded, and now it includes other issues as well, or even present-day issues. Originally, it was what had happened in the past, that we were not dealing with the past.
Dr. Jehan, would it be right for me to think, or at least observe, that the initial ethnic conflict that was there in Sri Lanka was used as a means for the international community, including the United Nations, to make inroads into Sri Lanka's broader issues? And now we have calls from Cardinal Malcolm Ranjit also to investigate the Easter Sunday attack, which was a completely domestic terrorist incident that, of course, had its fair share of ethnic issues as well. But my question to you really is, how wise is it? Now, I do understand, just a caveat, I do understand that it's important for the victims of the Easter Sunday attacks to receive justice as expeditiously as possible. But judging by the reality of the scenarios that have played out in other countries, even taking the 9/11 attacks that commemorated 20 years, many of the suspects are only detained, mostly at Guantanamo Bay and other foreign prisons. So how fair is it for Sri Lankans or Sri Lankan community to seek international assistance to find justice for this attack just 2 years or 3 years down the line? Is it wise?
I think the Cardinal would be asking would be threatening to go to the international community, because he's trying to motivate the government to do what it should be doing, to do the domestic inquiry. In the end, it is, I think, it is only if the government addresses the problems within the country that problems can be solved. The internationals can come and maybe punish individuals. Like when they are going abroad, they can be caught there and put on trial when they go abroad. And that, because of that, maybe they get worried and then they try and do something here. But ultimately, it has to be a Sri Lankan solution. We have to find the solutions ourselves. And but of course, there can be international advice and guidance also, because foreign countries have.
But Dr. Jahanpera, now let's take a look at the past for an example, will you? Now, the US was trying to pin down President Mahinda Rajapaksa and former Defense Secretary Gotabaya Rajapaksa at one point. There was issues just prior to the when Ahimsa Vikramatunga's issue came up. There was summons also issued to Gotabaya Rajapaksa in the US. But subsequently, when Gotabaya Rajapaksa was elected president of the country, the US seemed to have shown a blind eye towards all this and more. We saw the manner in which how Shavendra Silva was not even given access to visit the United States at one point. But all those things are now swept under the carpet. So respective governments that have come into play, even in countries like the US, are acting based on their political wishes, isn't it?
Yeah, there is also the issue of politics, geopolitics.
Yeah, so
these factors are all there.
Ultimately, as Nishan says, ultimately is a political gimmick. And it's all about talking, and no concrete action has been taken. Isn't this all that? You tell me, Dr. Jehan, you worked with the Norwegians quite well over the recent, when the peace process was taking place in Sri Lanka. Where are the Norwegians now? Where are the Norwegians now? Tell me, Dr. Jehan, you tell me. I'm asking you a question. I'm just trying to ask you a question because you've been working with the Norwegians and the Canadians and the Scandinavian countries a lot through your organization, that is the National Peace Council of Sri Lanka. What action are they taking now? Not a hum. Not even a hum about the reconciliation process in Sri Lanka anymore.
No, I think they are active in the UN Human Rights Council. They are part of that process, and even within the country, they are always trying to encourage our government. They are giving economic assistance to the government, and they are also engaging in dialogue with the government. They are trying to persuade the government that the best way forward for the country is to deal with these problems, address the past, unite our people, bring reconciliation and unite our people. I think they are supporting that.
What good has it come? Tell me one good thing that has come by addressing the past, Dr. Jehan. Now you've been handling the National Peace Council of Sri Lanka for a long period of time now. Since I was a journalist in 2004, I have associated you as the executive director of the National Peace Council. Tell me one good thing that has come out of all these processes. Tell me one good thing. Talking about the past and moving forward. Let's take a look at South Africa for an example. What good has it come? We're still talking about apartheid in countries like South Africa at this very moment. When did it end? In 1994. Sri Lanka ended the war in 2009. Can you expect any good to come out of it in 12 years?
There has been progress. No? There has been a lot of progress in Sri Lanka. Even what the government itself is saying, a lot of the land has been returned. Not all of the land, but a lot of the land has been returned.
So you are admitting the fact that the government has made progress?
Yes, there has been progress. Yes, life is better for Sri Lankans than during the time of the war. There has been progress in that, but
so Ambika, just Dr.
it is not what we can reach a greater potential.
So, Ambika, do you agree with the fact that Dr. Jehan is saying that progress has been made a lot since the end of the war?
Firstly, I would like to address what you said before, what you're asking Jehan about, kind of bombarding him with these questions, is that, you're asking you're placing the responsibility on the international community, asking them what are the Norwegians doing, what is the Human Rights Council doing. I think that is not the question. The most relevant question for us to ask is what is our own government doing? And all these mechanisms and processes are only to put pressure on the government. The accountability duty ultimately rests on the government. So I think it's a bit pointless to ask what the others are doing because they can also only do so much in relation to progress. I'm answering your question.
Yeah, but the problem, let me ask you another question.
Different question.
Yeah. The problem is, it's the international community that is trying to exert pressure on Sri Lanka.
Why is that?
Tell me, why is that?
I'm asking you.
You tell me.
I thought
if I was on the panel, I would definitely answer that question, but I don't.
Well, the reason that it's exerting is what I said in my first answer is because the government is not actually fulfilling its duty. The government is not protecting and promoting human rights, especially of the most vulnerable. There are still victims and survivors like families of the disappeared and others who want the truth and justice, and after so many years, some of them even decades, they don't have it. So that is why because they have tried so hard to put pressure on the government has not listened. If at all, they have faced reprisals. Hence, they had no option but to approach international mechanisms to seek a remedy.
But do you think progress has been made?
In what sense?
In terms of what Dr. Jehan said?
In relation to now, they say they have released land. Yes, and how do you think that happened? It would not have happened if we didn't have the resolution.
Forget about that.
No, but that is a fact. We can't forget it, Shamir, because that is a fact. When you say something had happened, we must see how and why it happened. That is because militarization has been on the agenda from that time, and there has been
But
pressure.
even now, Ambika, as you speak, there is emergency regulation in Sri Lanka at this
State
moment.
of emergency and
And
emergency
this is
regulation.
mentioned at the during the oral update today as well about the emergency regulations
Yes.
being imposed, and that they are watching closely if this may further expand the militarization into civilian activities.
Yeah, I mean, generally in progress, what we have seen is a deterioration of
government was listening
democracy and the rule of law,
If
right?
the government was listening to the UNHRC, Ambika, there won't be state of emergency in Sri Lanka at the moment.
Meaning what?
So you just said that the government was listening to the UNHRC resolutions, and that is why even land has been given away to.
Every time
the
there
right
was a
to water.
resolution to avoid it, they do something. So the advisory
So
board
whatever
was
that they're
set up
doing is
because
not enough,
Pardon?
not sufficient. Whatever that they're doing,
whatever they're doing is clearly not
like
enough because
releasing 16 detainees.
those
just
PTA,
before.
I mean, those are people, many of them I had actually met in prison, and most of them, their sentences were ending like in a month, 2, maximum 6 months. So in a sense, you are releasing people who are going to be released in a short time anyway, right? That does not solve the inherent problems with the PTA. Even the advisory board does not, because the advisory board doesn't have power at the end of the day. It can only make recommendations which the president can reject. The problem with the PTA is that it allows detention for 18 months, and the most problematic provision is the one that allows confessions to be admissible, because that is what leads to torture. Now, in the Human Rights Commission's prison study report, we have detailed it. There are narratives, right? We have looked at JMO reports. So torture did happen, and that is a huge problem. So if you do not address these problems, it doesn't matter if you appoint an advisory board. In the future and even now, violations can happen because the law itself is abusive and problematic.
Nishan, there are
Sorry.
So
Yeah, you
Nishan, Nishan, there's a question from one of our viewers. The question is, do you think, Nishan, whether you have any criticism of this government? Do you in any way see any faults at all?
Well, now, how fast are we doing things? Are we really intending to amend the PTA? Is the committee appointed to amend the PTA actually doing it in the required spirit of doing it? Now, Ambika mentioned confessions. I have other issues, identification parades, liability, and the detention period. All, I believe, have to be reduced. The PTA has to be looked at and repealed or amended, but my personal opinion is it has to be kept intact. So now,
It has to be what? Sorry.
PTA has to be kept intact. I don't believe
Kept intact.
Yes, in the sense not within this same or having these same provisions, but adjusting them. Now, for example, it is my position, you should not be able to keep somebody detained where a DO can be issued for 3 months and then thereafter extended repetitively up to 2 years. I think that is absolutely too wrong. But maximum for a period of 2 months, I believe, because
So you are, in other words, saying it has to be a wolf in sheep's clothing. So the international
so we
don't have anything
are
bad to
using
say.
this armor to also fight with, I don't know, wolves or more harmful animal, terror. So to fight a terrorist is not the mastermind of a terrorism attack, is not going to be doing things in the open. So you need to keep him detained.
Nishan, let's look at
Yes.
now, right after, I'm just telling you an example, right, because you're saying about terror and all that and more.
Yes, yes.
Now, look at the terrorist activity that took place in New Zealand, for an example.
Yeah.
Right after this took place, look at the statement that was issued by the New Zealand Prime Minister. Very diplomatic, very concise, and no harm to any minority groups in their country or even in Sri Lanka. Very, very simple, very logical, very straightforward. Look at the statements that came from our political parties right after the ISIS underbombings. Look at the statement. It was a stepping stone for another election campaign. So that is why even the Cardinal, as mentioned by Shalan, wants an international investigation. We're talking about terrorism. Of course, we're talking about terrorism. There has to be stringent action. There has to be security in play. There is no question about that. but the government is doing something wrong. And this government's track record in the past is not very good.
In respect to the Easter Sunday attack, Shal and Shamir, it's my personal opinion, perpetrators have to be brought before, the real perpetrators have to be punished, not X or Y or Z who was merely in the forefront. Now that, the cardinal, as Dr. Jehan very clearly mentioned, he is trying to possibly push the international community to get our Sri Lankan authorities to deliver. And very correctly, I feel he is helpless. So if he feels, I'm also a Catholic, I was also on the way to church that day, so I also have the same sentiments. We have to, not because I'm a Catholic, but because I'm a citizen in this country. If 300 people were blasted when they were at a place of worship, and if there is a report by judges of a Supreme Court already given, and that is not being acted upon, there is a question.
Nishan,
so that has to be done.
Nishan,
I am not in no any way any moment saying that we should not be doing that.
Nishan, a very personal question. Usually I don't ask personal questions at the show, but because you said that you were a Catholic, I didn't want to even mention that before, but you admitted the fact that you are a Catholic. Do you go to church on Sundays, or do you usually go to
Yes, I
church
do.
on Sundays, or you do go to? So when the Easter Sunday attacks took place, Nishan, did you fear going to the church?
Yes, definitely. I was actually, Shamir,
No,
on a personal-
very straightforward question. I
Yes.
just want a yes or no. Did you fear going to the church?
Yes, I did. I was very fearful. I was
were very
actually on the way to church. When I was passing the Kochikade church,
Yeah.
I saw the commotion there and I was on the way
Okay,
to
so
gate.
you were fearful. No, right, okay, understood. This was just one incident in Sri Lanka that happened in a very systematic way in 2019. Just imagine the pain of the Tamil community in Sri Lanka that has been undergoing this trauma for 3 decades, Nishan. Aren't they scared? Aren't they worried? Aren't they living in pain? Tell me, Nishan, don't you think about these minorities? 3
Definitely.
decades of civil war.
Definitely, Shamir. I am 100% with you. That's what at parts of my answers to y'all's questions, my position was this is not a battle to win this resolution or to market ourselves to the international community. This is about actually creating a unitary state. The Tamil community, the Muslim community, the Catholic community, the Sinhalese community, all of us have to be, the governance mechanism has to make everyone feel inclusive.
But Nishan, what has happened in Sri Lanka, police brutality, emergency regulations, police brutality on protesters, peaceful protesters, all took place after March 2021 this year. What is the faith of the international community on the Sri Lankan government at present? All this killing of notorious gangsters, they have to be prosecuted. Presidential pardons take place against anyone, just like that. Is that fair? Will the international community have faith? All this took place after March this year, after the resolution was adopted, where India, as you said, abstained along with a lot of Muslim countries.
So if I have to answer that question, emergency regulations, stopping protests, if that is what is required, now I am not a COVID expert, I am not here to decide what sort of gatherings should be permitted or not. But if it was done in the spirit of actually preventing the spread of COVID, and that is a necessary thing to be done in our country. Now emergency regulations, it's talked about. But the simple question is that an unconstitutional act? Is the president not empowered in terms of the Public Security Act to effect these emergency regulations? Now we all talk about constitutionality, unconstitutionality and all of that. So emergency regulations, if this is extended indefinitely, then a problem comes to be. But if this is brought in, kept for about a month, and thereafter this gazette is withdrawn, I don't see any harm. So that is what this lady today also says. You know, if we look at how she ends her oral update, I think Sri Lanka has hope. This is not, you know, I came here looking at y'all's topic queries as to whether it's disaster or consensus. I believe there is consensus. The government wants to meet with the requirements of the Human Rights Council. Now, I don't want to quote from Dr. Jahan's recent newspaper article, but he also says that the government is actually showing willingness. I'm not trying to take you off guard, but this is what you say.
No, but Dr. Jahan also said that the government has made progress. Only the fact that Ambika and Dr. Manik are not in agreement with Dr. Jahan on that.
Are we taking a poll here?
So doctor takes up the position that the government is taking steps to release LTT suspects. They have been doing that. It might be a mere attempt to, he tries to say it could be something where the government is trying to mislead the, or just to show that we are doing something, but in any event he concedes that something is happening.
Dr. Wakkumbara, sorry Nishan to interrupt.
Yes.
Dr. Wakkumbara, depending on the statement that was also delivered today, what is the ideal set of measures the government has to take if there's hope, if there's a way out of this, if we want the international countries to stop telling us what to do? Time to take charge, right? So what is the ideal way of moving forward?
Well, of course, timing is very important. I've been talking about the 12 years and I was talking about since 1980s also. So lot of consequences, lot of causes that we have seen almost by now. So it's very crucial that any government, despite its X or Y, any government in power, that we take very rapid action for governance mechanisms. Mechanisms in terms of rule of law, mechanisms to safeguard the human rights. You know, these are the matters that international community is keen about. And also these are the matters that also create loopholes for the international community to intervene and to manipulate, internal governance. And it's basically, it's our standpoint whether we would stand by internally as a community altogether, despite it's the different political parties based on ethnicities, despite it's the communities based on ethnicities, that we very fast act for some solid mechanism to work on these matters, because these matters have been there for such a long period. And if you look at the Human Rights Council, they have come with four implementations. They insisted on the judicial mechanism on the war crimes. They insisted us on the reparation. They insisted on the missing persons and the atrocities of the war crimes. So where we are is the question. Now,
sorry.
these are all of course, they're, yes.
You're coming to a very good point. You're talking about war crimes and all that, but I just want to drag the attention of one of the co-sponsors of the resolution, that is the US, at one given time. They withdrew from the resolution. That's a different story altogether, because their commitment to the UNHRC completely changed after Donald Trump was elected to power. However, where was this UNHRC when the US forces Marines went to Abbottabad in Pakistan and gunned down a terrorist leader? It was a sovereign nation, no, Dr. Manik. Then where was the UNHRC? Killing Osama bin Laden is good enough. That's well and good. We are not, there is no contention about that. But where was the UNHRC? Going to a sovereign state, carrying out a armed attack against a terrorist leader. We don't even know whether it was Osama bin Laden who was killed at the end of the day. Where was UNHRC then? Where was war crimes then?
Well,
where was the
yes.
UNHRC when individuals of the US forces sprayed at children? Where was the UNHRC when drone attacks was used?
Well,
Where was
actually, the UNHRC just today, the High Commissioner in a statement on Afghanistan, he mentioned drone attacks.
Yeah,
where 10 civilians were killed a few days ago in Afghanistan.
We'll talk about. I'll come back to you in a minute, Ambika. So where was the UNHRC at that time?
Well, of course, US altogether is a very very interesting case that we tend to analyze the politics of US in terms of how they manipulate their agendas in other territories is a different case that we need some time to reflect on that by taking case by case. But on the other hand, we have to remember now, look at the period that had the longest war that we call the Cold War period, starting off from 45 to 89. And during this period, not a single resolution has been passed in the UN Security Council, just because of the fact that these superpowers, Soviet Russia and US, were competing on each other in the UN Security Council. So, how they work in world politics is a different case. And then if you go to a case like, Israel and Palestine, when Human Rights Council started its mandate in 2007, the first mandate was to look at the violence in Palestine. The violence that caused the Arabs have been displaced in Gaza Strip. There were a lot of, cross-border violence that have extended to Lebanon. So the mandate was to look at to what extent Israel caused damage to the Arab communities in the Gaza Strip and the border communities. And there was there were no results. There were no results. The resolutions have passed, but there are no results.
What you're saying is what Israel is doing to the Palestinians is okay.
Well, no. My point is to see how some states manipulate some of these resolutions. And it's a very clear case study where you see the Israel, do have a very clear mandate with US. And at the time of peace and at the time of war. And whenever the UN Security Council, UN Human Rights Council takes this into consideration, you see the absence of debate.
So one of our viewers are saying that the US has waged 25 wars since 1950, starting with the Korean War, ending with Afghanistan, and nothing concrete has taken place by the UNHRC against such a body.
Of course, these politics are quite possible. I'm not denying the fact that everything just function in a very clear-cut way. Everything will fall under the procedures. There's no procedures as long as people don't.
Which country contributes to majority of the expenses of the UNHRC or the United Nations, Dr. Manik? Do you know?
I didn't get your question, sorry.
Which country in the world contributes through its budgetary allocations a significant amount of money to the sustenance of the United Nations or the United Nations Human Rights Council? Do you know, Dr.
Of course, it's
which country?
If it comes to
Sweden, then Norway, then European Commission, then Switzerland, to OHCHR, not UN, but to OHCHR and the So it's mostly the European countries that contribute. The UN actually, the US didn't pay contributions for quite some time.
I'm not talking about the OHCHR. OHCHR is the Office of the Commission of the Human Rights Commission, Ambika. I'm talking about the United Nations as a whole. Which do you all know which country contributes to majority of the expenses?
I think the last time I saw it was the US that contributed.
It was the US.
It's the US.
It was the US.
It's no doubt it's the US.
So if it's the US, do you think it's because of the fact that this political body is riddled with the fact that they don't like someone's face, they want to penalize that, they're using United Nations Human Rights Council sessions as the guinea pig to penalize countries? Can't that be the case?
Well, I don't have a proper answer for that. I try to look at this in a more diplomatic way. I still see there's a possibility that UN Human Rights Council taking action for speeding up the recovery mechanism, the speeding up the governance mechanism, speeding up for example, you know, if there are deteriorating of human rights and then Human Rights Council makes claims on the government to, you know, stop doing so. So that reporting and monitoring is to certain extent is fine. It's fine. It's because the world has come to the level where the individuals that stay in a one boundary will not be altogether safe.
So we have a question for
if the country
yeah.
Leads these people into trouble.
Yeah.
So someone has to look into this question.
Yeah, so Nishan very rightly pointed out by Ambika and Dr. Manik with regard to why the United Nations should be there to make sure that countries who violate human rights are put under watch. So the next question is from one of our viewers who says, it is very clear that the government is not serious in upholding human rights of minorities or the vulnerable if not for external pressure by international community. So isn't it the only solution to go to the UNHRC by the minority and the vulnerable to get their rights back? Then what is the fuss even if the UNHRC is a politicized body and that is the only solution to uphold the democracy and human rights in the country?
I have to agree with that position taken, because if the minorities feel, Shamir, that their grievances are not addressed by the government, they have to use political or foreign bodies to pressurize our governance mechanism to look after their interests. So if the person who posed that question is a minority and is feeling in that vein, then that is an issue which the government needs to address, and that should not be the case. Any government, present government, previous government, or the governments even prior to that, they have to ensure that every citizen in this country feels that they are part of an inclusive system, part of a unitary state. And if that is, and coming back to the pertinent point, what's the fuss? If it is a politicized body even, if that is the only place they can go to get their grievances looked at, they have to go there.
So you're saying if the government is pushing them to the ledge and saying, okay, this is the option that is left to you, you may go and get your redress from even a UN body or even a politicized body, as long as it doesn't affect us. Is that what you're trying to say?
I'm not conceding that the present government is doing that, but I am...
No, but you just said.
No, I am if the person is feeling so, if the minority or a minority community is feeling that there is no addressing of their grievance, then that is an issue of concern to that government, and they have to address it. But saying that, you know, fundamentally, Shamir, I believe it's my position that the UNHRC can't do much to Sri Lanka. This resolution won't have any impact. It won't be imposed on Sri Lanka where we will have an invasion and these judges will come and courts will be set up and there will be trials held against the alleged perpetrators. I don't believe we will go there. But, you know, we are presently, Sri Lanka is trying to, they have passed a new Finance Act. They have passed a new SEC Act. They are looking at a port city. We can't live in isolation. I'm a commercial lawyer. I think in the commercial sense. We need, as Dr. Jehan pointed out, GSP is a very important thing for our country. Now we can't even, you know, we will win this resolution. It might be vetoed down and Sri Lanka will win it. But that being said, and at that instance, it's not the government or any party to go and light crackers and eat kiribat. That is not the prudent way of thinking. I am not there. My position is, we have to try to win the world. Perception is important. That is called statesmanship. Or that
because Nishan,
yeah.
Just a very quick question, Nishan. Are you intending to contest an election in the future? I just want to know for my benefit.
No. If I put it in black and white saying that I will never contest an election,
yeah,
and you all can even have it on record, I will abide by that. I am not going to contest. I am happy being a lawyer.
Right.
and I'm not going to be contesting.
Even if you're appointed through the national list, would you accept that position?
Well, now that's another point. Now people are saying all people who are in parliament are not very much educated, or they are, coming.
But you won't contest, so there won't be any.
I won't be contesting.
Any need for you to be worried about whether people will be angry with you, or there won't be any need for that, right? You can be honest and brutal in what you're saying. No, just very straightforward, open-ended questions.
No,
you won't be worried.
There's
about...
nothing for people to get angry about.
Right. Okay. So, then my next question to you. Now, interestingly, Nishan, you went on to say that when there were protesters on the road because of COVID, the government took certain actions, and it was okay because under COVID regulations they could do so.
I didn't say okay. I said I'm not a COVID specialist.
Yeah, COVID specialist, but they did
if they did it in the intention of that's up to them.
Right, okay.
That's
what
governance.
you said. I agree with what you said. Okay. Then when Basil Rajapaksa was appointed to Parliament and appointed as the Minister of Finance, when people were on the roads lighting crackers and eating kiribat, where was the law? Where was these COVID specialists?
Shamir, that is unfortunately not a question which I can answer.
No,
I'm not.
No, you're not. You
I'm not. I'm not in governance.
Yeah.
I'm not governing.
Yeah.
So I am.
No, but where were these people?
I'm
because
not factual.
I understand when you say when protesters were nabbed and taken action against because they were protesting on the roads, and that created a menace, and henceforth the government had to intervene and take action. Well understood, no problem at all. When Basil Rajapaksa was appointed as a minister, when the people were lighting crackers, when people were eating kiribat, when there were no social distancing, where was the law then, Nishan?
The law has to be equal to everyone.
Right.
That is.
So there was a problem.
There, if what you say, I have to be truthful to you.
Yeah.
I have not seen images of what you
if
just
you want,
say.
I can show you a few images.
So I take your word. I'm not here to dispute on that.
Yeah.
So if there was different criteria of law being exercised to a certain contingent of the population and another angle for another,
this
that is not
the
correct.
very discrimination that is being spoken of by the United Nations Human Rights Commissioner in Geneva. This is the very discrimination. Isn't it, Nishan? Don't you just think this is the very discrimination?
I don't know. To be truthful to you, that doesn't come to being from what has been stated today. That what this lady says is that Sri Lanka needs to look at certain things, and the lady is concerned that Sri Lanka has seemingly deviated from the minimum required progressive steps it ought to have taken from March to today. So now, with all due respect to the government of Sri Lanka, they have not yet replied to this. I don't know whether there is a right of reply to this.
No, there is a right of reply, right?
The learned personnel can appraise. So if there is a right of reply, they will reply. Has the government replied to this?
Not yet.
Not yet. Yes. So then, with all in any forum, there is a defense. So let the government reply to this formally, for the people also to understand their position, and then let the UN also decide thereafter whether the government is making some rational reasoning.
So, Ambika, you also represent the minority in Sri Lanka. Am I right?
I don't represent. I am a minority, but I don't represent them.
You are a minority, but at one point, Ambika, you were also a nationalist MP.
But I was still not representing them.
Your name was proposed as a nationalist.
I was still
MP
not
of
representing them, Shamir.
Excuse me?
Yeah, I was still not, just because you're on the national list doesn't mean that you're representing them. You represent them when you go to parliament or you have a political party.
Yeah,
so I was just correcting you.
But you were part of the nationalist allocation of the ITAC, right?
I was on the list. Everyone knows that. That's public knowledge.
Yeah, okay. So, Ambika, was there any given time in your career as the Human Rights Commissioner of Sri Lanka, you were more towards inclining to address the grievances of the minority population in the country and not the majority? Was there any any issue in that?
Well, that maybe you should ask the staff at the commission and the people who actually approached me. Naturally, I mean, I would say no, given the fact that I dealt with all sorts of complaints, even from people in the police or people in some of the armed forces would come to me with their complaints. Dealt with complaints of people in prison of all ethnicity. So I don't personally, clearly I would say I am not biased.
I know a lot of work that you've done as the Human Rights Commission of Sri Lanka in terms of the reports that you've issued and so on and so forth. There's no contention about that, Ambika, but I just want to get some clarity in the questions that I'm going to ask you in
Okay, you know what? Minority in this sense. I've always been someone who's championed the causes of people who've been marginalized and vulnerable. So for instance, if you take LGBTIQ community, if you talk to the activists here, they will...
Understood.
Yeah.
So understood. So do you agree that the Tamil political parties in Sri Lanka who act saying that they represent the Tamil majority in the country are not doing their job?
Well, not that they say, they do actually represent because they are in parliament.
They say that they represent.
Yeah, and they do. And the fact is, I mean, they are in parliament, right? So people elected them.
Yeah.
Do they do their job? Well, I would have to say that not completely. That is exact. I mean, they don't, but they are active in parliament. They do raise pertinent issues, particularly in this parliament. Many of them are very active and raise issues that are not only of relevance to the minority communities, but even in terms of forced cremations, even in terms of whether it's the port city. So issues that affect the entire country, you do see the Tamil politicians raising that in parliament. So they are playing their kind of role as elected representatives, but clearly I do feel that there is much more that they can do, and there are issues within the parties, between the parties, etc. So that's the reality.
In terms of the cremations, now there is a lot of, I represent, not represent, but I am part of the minority in Sri Lanka as well, Ambika. I'm a Muslim. So there were fear amongst the Muslim community in Sri Lanka at one point that they would be forcefully cremated. But now
they did forcibly cremate.
But now situation has been addressed. Now there is a plot of land that has been allocated in the eastern province of Sri Lanka. So if there are Tamil Muslim COVID patients who die as a result of COVID, they can always be transferred to those plots of land. However, the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights makes reference about that as well in
because that is still a problem. No, because I do know Muslim. I work with people who work with the Muslim community, etc. And I do know for a fact that people who die in other parts of the country, it is extremely costly. It's traumatic. It is very difficult for them to transport the body from here to Ottamavadi. Now in Ottamavadi also, the plot of land is full, and now they've said that they've allocated another piece of land. The simple question is this. When even the WHO has said that burial is safe, that you have more than 100 countries all over the world who bury, why is it that Sri Lanka is so unique that here it poses a danger to people? I really do not understand that. What about all the waste that comes from hospitals, the COVID waste? Do we know how we're disposing it, how that gets into the groundwater, etc.? So I think this is actually, it's all about the cruelty, because you are being cruel to the Muslim community.
So Nishan, that's a very important point, because we saw the manner in which in 2021 April, March, this was one of the issues that was discussed by the Muslim countries in the world over with regard to the forced cremations that were taking place. The government had to take a complete U-turn as a result of the foreign pressure that was exerted on Sri Lanka to make sure that there is a burial place for the Muslim COVID victims. Cruelty, is that what it's all about?
Well, I don't know. I don't think it was cruelty, Shamir. Because there was difference in medical opinion at that time. There was disputes within the specialist panel appointed in respect of water contamination. And I'm actually not a specialist to decide on that, but I'm possessed that there was also various views coming through the government as to whether cremation should be stopped and burial should be permitted. And ultimately, the fact of the matter is, through whatever means, now it is resolved. And that issue has been addressed. So we, as a nation, have to be happy that the government managed to resolve it. Though it took time, though there was controversy, we have managed to settle it now, and it is no longer an issue.
Azra, do you have any questions?
Yes, but
from,
Nishant, the trauma
Dr.
that
Jehan
this-
or Ambika or Dr. Manik, or I can continue asking.
No, Shamir, I think we'll have to end
Yeah,
the program
yeah,
also soon. Dr. Jehan, my final question to you. There are committees, like Ambika said earlier, taking a small step back to the conversation. There are committees, professionals, experts, giving recommendations, advising the government as to what to do and when to do and how to do it. President has powers. If the president is the final place where the final decision is made, the president has power, from the new amendment to the constitution and all sorts of things. But why the lackadaisical approach in taking enough and more steps to ensure that this problem in the country is resolved, so this is one less problem for us to worry about, even with this COVID-19 pandemic in the country?
I suppose the problem you're...
Human rights. The fact that...
Well, that's a very major problem, no? Because human rights concerns the way we are governed, our values, everything. But I'm hopeful that things are changing, because this government that came in on a Sinhala majority platform, very nationalist, thinking they could defy the world, in fact, ignore the international community, do it our own way, I think has learned that it's not possible, that we are interdependent. We have to, GSP Plus is dependent on UNHRC, and UNHRC is dependent on the way we implement human rights in our country. I think our government has taken that lesson to heart. In the last 2 months, the government leaders, the top leaders of the country, have been meeting with civil society and listening to what we had to say to them. They have not been contesting us, they have not been getting angry, even though we point out the violations that are taking place and what should be done. Now the question is, will they implement? We don't know. They have listened, they have engaged in dialogue. We think, we are hopeful. Like Sisyphus, we are hopeful that they are going to change. Sisyphus rolled the bolt, took the bolt up the mountain.
Said, Doctor, there's about this meeting that you're talking about with the civil society organizations and the meeting with the president. But there's still surveillance, intimidation, and judicial harassment of human rights defenders, journalists, and families of the disappeared. So, yeah, they're doing what needs to be done, but no implementation. You're talking about changes, but how long?
First, the change has to be in the mind. Let us hope that the change has taken place in their minds. Then it will manifest itself in the future. That is our hope. At the moment, it has not happened.
Dr. Jehan, now,
Granted.
you came on this show in February 2021. Remember, Dr. Jehan? You were very optimistic with the government's trajectory. You said things are going to be done. It's important that you give some time and space for the government to perform. But today, you've shifted gears. You've somewhat taken a U-turn, in my opinion. Why, Dr. Jehan?
You turn which way?
You tell me.
No, I'm still hopeful. I'm still hopeful.
Because when you came on the show in February, Dr. Jehan, I was trying to figure out, I in fact asked you a question, Dr. Jehan, have you switched sides? And then you said, no, I'm saying more time has to be given to the government. But now, 7 months down the line, the man has changed completely. What happened, Dr. Jehan? What happened?
He's still saying they need to be given time, so I don't
Ambika,
think
I'm
he
asking
has
a question
changed.
from Dr.
I think he's hopeful.
Thank you, Ambika.
Shamir.
No, you have to let me.
No, because this government leadership has the credibility with the ethnic majority. They have a 2/3 majority in parliament. All they need, what they need is the will, the desire to do what is right. In the discussions with us, they have told us that they will do it. People don't believe. We are having hope that they mean what they say.
Dr. Jehan, look at how ironic the state of affairs in Sri Lanka is. You hear recently a minister, a parliamentarian saying that the people have to sacrifice at least one of the meals a day, and they have to live with 2 meals a day because they have to think about the government's future and the forward outlook of this country. Whereas right now the government is not making any sort of commitment from their end in terms of giving their salaries to the COVID fund is a different story altogether. But you saw the manner in which how delegations have gone to Italy, how President's chief of staff, also the son, Prime Minister's chief of staff, also son accompanying the Prime Minister to Italy. All these are problematic, isn't it? Doesn't this raise an eyebrow, Dr. Jahan?
You're right. I mean, it's there is the imperative impulse of all politicians to stay in power, to win the next election, to do what they can to get the votes, keep the votes. On the other hand, hopefully they also want to serve the national interest. There's a balance in that.
So Nishan, this brings to my final question to you. Do you think the government is doing the right thing? Do you think the government is doing enough? Do you think that the government is doing what is needed in the eyes of the general public? I'm not only talking about the majority, I'm talking about the minorities as well. Is the government doing enough?
Shamir, now in February, the Office for National Unity and Reconciliation was set up. Now, quite an eminent, respected senior lawyer, President's Counsel, Mr. Kushandi Alvis was appointed. I have the highest respect, and most of the personnel in the legal fraternity and even in the public has a great degree of respect for that gentleman. Now he heads the National Unity and Reconciliation Bureau that is coming under the Ministry of Justice. Now it is only about 5 months or 6 months to date. But now reconciliation can't happen online. You can't have virtual reconciliation sessions. You need to be able to meet with the aggrieved and the affected parties and have one-on-one sessions of reconciliation. Now if you go to the Ministry of Justice website, you would see the objectives of the National Unity and Reconciliation Bureau. Now this came to being, some would say, in the light of the proposed paper which was placed or just at the brink of the resolution which was to be passed. Either way, there is a domesticated process now set up. Now then the next question is, what should the minorities do? Now the minorities can't be also looking at and complaining that there is a Sinhala gentleman who is heading this, and that because of that there is a question mark as to the credibility or the integrity or the transparency of the reconciliation process. I think the distrust divide also has to be conquered. We have to, as a nation, be able to trust each and every citizen irrespective of their caste or creed. That has to be done. Now I am confident of this body which has been set up under the Ministry of Justice, and the Minister of Justice is also a minority, and I believe he too would take a very serious, or will make every endeavor to ensure that actual reconciliation will take place, and that needs to happen for Sri Lanka as a nation. Now then, in respect
I
to the
just want to correct you,
Yes.
Nishan, if you don't mind, please.
Yes.
The office the Office of the National Unity of Reconciliation was established in
Under the
2015.
That's correct. Yeah.
Only the officers were appointed by the government because they didn't have any other option.
Definitely,
Yeah,
definitely.
so I just want to correct.
I concede to that,
Yeah.
and it came in 2015 by a gazette. It was my mistake. I
This was
concede,
in
Shamir.
April,
But
so-
either way, the body was constituted. If I
Yeah, I
may,
was trying to figure out which body did this government appoint.
right.
And
So
you were
anyway,
trying-
to a body which was already in existence, they appointed credible people, and that body has a degree of power to do certain things. And I think we have to trust that hopefully with the pandemic easing, that this body can actually endeavor into actual hands-on reconciliation and be able to address issues which arise in respect of minorities. And in addition, the other pertinent issue which I see in the Human Rights Council's resolution is this PTA Act. So seemingly if the PTA Act provisions are curtailed, then most of these alleged wrongdoings could seemingly be reduced.
So this won't be like the commission that was appointed by Ghana, right?
Well, I hope not.
Nishan?
And I trust the
There's no action
gentleman.
that was taken after that. The commission report ended in 2004 in Ghana, and there was no concrete action taken after that because there was a democratically elected government in 2000 in Ghana. That was the result of the National Unity and Reconciliation Commission in 2000 in Ghana as well. So that was in operation for 4 years. But nothing concrete took place. Now this government appointed members to this particular commission in question this year in February. Do you think that also would be not?
No, I think they are not merely put there to do an investigation and to submit a report. They are actually required to go and do reconciliation. They are actually required to go and do groundwork, and that is reconciliation.
So let's say COVID wreaks havoc in Sri Lanka for the next 2 to 3 years. So this commission won't do anything. They'll sit back and wait until COVID is over.
No. I think they are doing certain other aspects of work, but the real, it's my opinion, the real reconciliation requires the people who are affected to be reached out to. You need to be able to do that. And that's what I said, I don't think you can do reconciliation online. You have to go to the affected areas, meet the people, create that.
But that is not the new normal, Nishan. You know it very well.
Yes, so if that is required,
how can you go and touch and feel and get the impression of the public when there is COVID?
So if as you try to say that if this pandemic extends, I am positive that
no, because after a few years, the government might say, I'm not saying the government will say it, but the government might say we couldn't do all this because there was the COVID-19 pandemic wreaking havoc in Sri Lanka and the world over.
No, I
and
think
the world body has to understand that.
No, now
what if they say that?
No, government has already said that.
Yeah, government
has already, with all due respect to you also, the government has said that in
January,
reply,
yes, they said
that we are having issues with COVID. So I don't think this is a getaway mechanism where we can.
They might say it again.
Yeah, but saying that the credibility issues will be questioned. So it's my personal opinion that the government right now understands the importance of creating global perception in respect of Sri Lanka. It is going to make a strong effort to address certain concerns within the purview of our constitution and our legal framework to do actual reconciliation in order to take Sri Lanka to the world. Because as I told you all earlier, if we should defeat this resolution in 1.5 years' time, but that might not be what Sri Lanka wants. We need to actually reconcile the minorities and the people who have been aggrieved.
Right.
So the government needs to do that.
Right, thank you very much. The two gentlemen and the two ladies, we go in for a short commercial break. When we come back, it's final round. We are in discussion with Dr. Manik, Ambika, Dr. Jehan, as well as Nishan, with regard to the UNHRC, where is Sri Lanka headed? Disaster or consensus? It's up to you to decide. We're going for a short commercial break. Stay connected, stay with Face the Nation. We will be right back. Welcome back. This is Face the Nation. We are in the final round. We start off the final round with Dr. Jehan Pereira, Executive Director, National Peace Council of Sri Lanka. Dr. Pereira, what is the way forward?
The way forward is, I think, what the UN is asking us to do offers us the roadmap. These are all good things for our country, to amend the PTA, to hold provincial council elections, to return the land, to stop torture, encourage broader dialogue with civil society. These are all positive things. That plus, I think we should also address the root of, one major root of our problem, the problem we have not been able to cope with from the time we received independence, the ethnic issue. The issue of how to share power in this country, how to govern this country with the majority and minorities, how the minorities can also share power, make decisions together. These are the two issues. So solving the ethnic conflict through a political settlement, which many leaders in our country try to do. SWR Bandaranaike, Dudley Senanayake, Chandrika Bandaranaike, most recently Ranil Wickremesinghe and Sirisena.
You didn't mention Mahinda Rajapaksa's name.
Yeah, he's there now.
No, you didn't mention his name.
He is very important. He's very important. The future lies with him, where he gives his blessings to the solution. So that is one set of problems. The other is the human rights issues, governance, independent institutions, going back from the 20th to the 19th. That's the way forward that I see. And if we do that, we can develop our country the way it should be developed.
So Gotabaya Rajapaksa is also not there in this equation?
No, Gotabaya is the president.
Yeah. No, because you mentioned all the presidents and prime ministers' names.
Yes.
You inadvertently forgot two names.
No, because...
One was President Mahinda Rajapaksa and President Gotabaya Rajapaksa.
Because they are in power at this time, and I'm hoping that they will achieve what all the previous leaders failed to do.
Achieve. Let's be optimistic. Thank you very much, Dr. Jehan Pereira, Executive Director of the National Peace Council of Sri Lanka. I now move my attention to Dr. Manik Wakkamura, Department of International Relations, University of Colombo. Way forward for Sri Lanka.
Well, Shamir, the first and the last thing that I want to say, that I'm looking at this as an educationalist and from the research point of view. And I do like if we have possibilities within ourselves. But at the same time, we have to understand there are crucial issues that have been not addressed for a period of time. And we know the fact that UN Human Rights Council have brought this number of resolutions, starting off from now, we shouldn't be forgetting the fact that their claim has been there before the end of the war. There were reporting before the end of the war. But when it comes to the most recent period, starting off from the 30/1, and the claim is to make accountable action for reconciliation, truth and justice, which is something we all as citizens also looking within ourselves. So there is no way that I deny that fact, no way that I look at absurd solutions by hiding the truth that we have to work within ourselves to find a sustainable solution. And that hope, as Dr. Jehan said, that hope is there in myself as well. And that's my last comment.
Thank you very much, Dr. Manik Wakkamura. I now move my attention to Ambika Satkuranathan, human rights advocate, as well as one of the former commissioners of the Human Rights Commission of Sri Lanka.
What's the way forward?
Yes.
Well, I think I endorse what Dr. Manik and Jehan have said. Additionally, I think one of the things is state reform, because we do have a problem with governance. We say we are a democratic society, but we really haven't internalized those values. It is quite a feudal society still, and it's patronage driven, and that is what drives the political culture, which is what makes it very difficult to resolve something like the ethnic conflict. And secondly, about this reconciliation, everyone uses the word reconciliation. Reconciliation, you can't, with all due respect, it's like you can't do reconciliation. Reconciliation is the natural outcome of the achievement of certain things like truth, justice, reparation. It is supposed to be natural. It's not, you know, let's hold hands together and sing Kumbaya kind of thing. It is not possible, you know. So it is a process. And unless you have the truth, justice, reparations, it is quite impossible to have reconciliation because you're trying to create something artificially.
Thank you very much, Ambika Sadguranathan, human rights advocate, as well as former commissioner of the Human Rights Commission of Sri Lanka. Nishan Sidney Premuthiratna, attorney at law, affiliated to the Ministry of Justice. Your final thoughts.
Shamir, going through the resolution which has been adopted on the 23rd of March 2021, there are so many matters which have been placed upon the government of Sri Lanka to consider. Now, most of them probably are matters which the government can work on, and seemingly the government is working on by taking steps to amend the PTA, by appointing personnel to the National Unity Council, and trying to adhere to the requirements of the UN resolution. That being said, it is also mindful, it is also important for Sri Lanka to work within the purview of our own constitution. We should not be able to, or we should not be put under duress or pressure to give in to everything these foreign elements require. For example, if I take element number 5 or item number 5 in the proposed resolution, it says, notes the persistent lack of accountability of the domestic mechanism that the Domestic Commission of Inquiry announced on 22nd of January 2021 lacks independence. That is what the resolution says. Now, with all due respect, this Commission of Inquiry, which was announced on the 22nd of January 2021, has a Supreme Court judge, an appointed, constitutionally appointed Supreme Court judge sitting on it. Now, it is all good and well for us to come here and say that Sri Lanka should make every endeavor to fall in line with this resolution. Yes, we have to. Even if we don't fall in line, as I told all of you all, it is my position that Sri Lanka might be able to ultimately defeat this resolution, at least on paper. But now, in a matter like this, when the UN Council of Human Rights is saying that a committee appointed which has a Supreme Court judge sitting is not independent, how does Sri Lanka react to that? Who are we to appoint? A judge appointed by the constitution, sitting judge being appointed into a commission, is told, or his independence is questioned by the resolution. So these are matters of concern. However, governing is not or cannot be done in isolation. We, not being a superpower, as very correctly pointed out by Dr. Jehan, we need the world. We rely on the world. We need GSP, we need dollars, we need foreign investors, we need to be able to change the perception of the world in respect of our country. We need, thus, the minority of our country to be able to also go out to the world and canvass everyone to come towards Sri Lanka. Otherwise, Sri Lanka cannot come out from where we are. We cannot, we might be able to bring in all the possible investor-oriented pieces of legislature, but if the perception doesn't change, that means that Sri Lanka's entire endeavor is futile. So, closing, my humble position is we should try our level best to align ourselves to this resolution, but in the process of doing that, actually try to reconcile and address grievances of the minorities within our country.
Thank you very much, Nishan Sidney Premuthiratna, Dr. Manik Wakkumura, Ambika Sadguranathan, as well as Dr. Jehan Pereira for joining us this evening on Face the Nation. Thank you very much, the young lawyer-to-be Sharon Benedict, as well as manager of English News, Azra Hassan, for joining us this evening on the show. I leave you tonight with a quote, as I always do. reconciliation should be accompanied by justice, otherwise it will not last. While we all hope for peace, it shouldn't be peace at any cost, but peace based on principle and on justice. Take care and good night.